Well, there's a lot of praise for the work that you've done so far at the NBS, but there's also criticism.
Of course.
I recall that only recently, as former CBN Governor Chukwuma Soludo, raised his voice. He questioned the figures. He said, how can we have updates on the statistics when we have not done new surveys?
I'm not sure which criticism you're referring to. The one I remember was a kind of face-off between himself and the former finance minister. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to. And I think he was focusing, he wasn't actually criticizing the statistics office. Actually, what he said was in support, because the statistics office released poverty numbers that the then finance minister, I think, if I remember, rejected because they were showing that poverty was worsening. And we said, those are figures, we're not going to change them, we stuck by it. And then the World Bank used some other MBS figures to actually go and estimate a different number. And that's what the finance minister chose to use, because those numbers obviously look better. And I think Professor Soludo was saying, well, as far as it's concerned, we have not done another poverty study. He was right. We did a general household survey. The methodology involved in that survey is not significant, it's substantial enough to actually take any definite decisions on poverty. But they just used that to create some estimates. And they even admitted in their report that this is not the right approach. We're just using this as an estimate. But of course, there's a difference between what the data says and how it's interpreted. Now, policymakers can choose to see a particular number and decide to twist it in whatever way they want to suit their purposes. That doesn't mean the number is wrong. It depends on the interpretation of those numbers. And people can twist numbers to suit their purpose. Remember the GDP rebasing. The objective was not to be the largest economy in Africa or anything like that. The objective was to get the structure of our economy updated. The largest economy, that was like a side effect. But that's what the politicians focused on, because that's what they were interested in.
And you can't blame them. But then, the reason why some people would say and go with that, I mean, talking about new surveys, is the fact that, for instance, we have not conducted any population census in a long time, and it would seem that the MPC, for instance, keeps using projections, growth rate and all of that. And sometimes they also infer that the statistics office might be doing the same thing.
No, our surveys are published every year. Yet you can pick up our budget, you see all the surveys that we conduct. At every time we are conducting surveys, we always advertise in the media, mainly because we want people to know that we might be coming to knock on your door to get some information from you. And if you check the last few years...
So you actually knock on people's doors?
Oh, yes.
That's a little
when we are doing household surveys, and see, before you say that nobody has knocked on your door, because I've had that question before. It's a survey, and what surveys do is you pick a representative sample of the whole. So if you have between 100 and 180 million, whatever the number is, and you pick a sample of, say, 100,000, the probability that you be among that 100,000. Again, that 100,000 representatives, so you are picking from the rural areas. We are going into the villages, crossing bush paths, renting boats to cross the rivers in the south. That's where we get the data from. So the possibility that you'll be selected from 100,000 that is divided between rural and urban is very, very slim.
Conducted every how so often?
Depending on the particular data you're collecting. There's information we get on a weekly basis, like inflation numbers. We get inflation numbers every week. Go to markets, we go to households to get information. There's data that we get on a monthly basis. There's data we get on a quarterly basis. There's data like poverty, inequality that we will not get until every year, because
Let me take you quickly on some of the criticisms as also trailed. They talk about it not being granular enough. They talk about unemployment figures. They've not seen it broken down by states. Is there a reason you do that?
We have the information by states.
But you don't release it.
Yeah, well, we release it. But the reason is, let me just start by saying at least we only publish about 10 to 15% of the data that we collect. Now, the reason is that we can't possibly publish everything, to go into thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands of indicators.
But for people who crunch data, for people who need this data, do they have to request to you to get the data?
That's exactly what they do. Now they come, and all we are doing is, imagine putting all that information on the website. Just the unemployment data, you can go into 20,000 indicators. What we do is we put the information there on an aggregated level. Now there's no way we can have the aggregated numbers. Obviously, it was built from the ground. So if we have the aggregated numbers, obviously we have the the lower level numbers. So the idea is people come and say, I've seen this unemployment numbers, but I need a bit more detail.
But
we get the detail they want and we send it to them. We've done that many times.
There's also the accusation, that perhaps you're trying to be politically correct because there is information that you actually publish by states.
Yeah.
For instance, the transport data in terms of whether or not it's going up or coming down.
Yeah.
You do publish that by state, so why not unemployment?
If you notice, we didn't publish that in the last few years. We only started doing that. Now we try to make our data demand driven. We don't want to publish data that nobody's particularly interested in because the
state governments will be interested in that. Journalists will be interested in that. Investors will be interested in that.
We try not to predict what people will be interested. When we now see that people are asking, that's exactly why we started publishing transport data, because we saw there was an increase in. And the reason we started was because on my Twitter page, somebody asked me for it. And I said, okay, if there's an interest in this, let's start publishing. That's the way we increase our data production. Once we get people that start asking for these things, we see that this is something people want to use, then we commit resources. We don't want to waste limited resources. We commit resources to what people are interested in seeing.
Dr. Kale, we have to take a moment now, and when we return, we will also focus on the relationship between statistics and the ease of doing business. Don't go away.